Well, today is the vlog for May 20th, 2018. Last night I found an old movie that I have not seen, golly, in a decade. The first and previous time I had seen it was with my buddy Sean, and it's a movie called Lupin the Third, Castle of Cagliostro. And it is a Lupin the Third film directed by Hayao Miyazaki, famous for many, many animated films. He's known as the Walt Disney of Japan. And I think in some ways he's more accomplished as a director than Walt Disney, but he's not necessarily the same sort of pioneer that Walt Disney was, although he was a very influential animator, not only in Japan, but in America and throughout the world. He's directed films like Spirited Away, Howl's Moving Castle, which is my personal favorite, My Neighbor Totoro, Kiki's Delivery Service, Pom Poko, which is another one I'm very fond of about raccoons, tanuki, which are Japanese raccoon dogs. They're not actually related in very closely to raccoons in the Western world. And another movie called Porco Rosso, which is about a pig that's a pilot in the Adriatic Sea. And Studio Ghibli actually gets its name from seaplanes. Specifically, a manufacturing group in Italy, if I remember correctly, that made custom one-off seaplanes, I want to say in the period between World War I and World War II. So each one of these planes is unique, and many of them are very esoteric and don't make a lot of sense based on what we think about when we think about aeronautics, aerodynamics, plane manufacturing in general. But that definitely comes through in Porco Rosso. But Castle of Cagliostro is such a neat movie because it has all the hallmarks of Miyazaki's earlier work. Lots of fanciful things, lots of things that would be at home in Alice in Wonderland or many Disney animated films. Something stuck in my teeth. How's that for high-class vlog stuff? Anyway, Castle of Cagliostro takes place in a fictional country of Cagliostro. Lupin the Third, and I watched the English dub from before the Lupin the Third TV show was syndicated. So they don't actually call him Lupin; they call him Wolf. Which that was a little bit jarring. I might have to go back and watch it again in Japanese, but it's a film from a time where there weren't as many sort of rules as to how anime was supposed to be. And I think that's one thing that always drew me to Miyazaki, is that he sort of played by his own rules. He was a trendsetter, and calling him the Disney of Japan, I think, is a little unfair just because he's his own man, and while he's had the same sort of impact on animation that Walt Disney has had, that impact is unique. And I wanted to check, and it is in fact a film that's older than I am. It was released in 1979, which is astounding because I kept watching it and thinking this has to be 80s because the animation quality is so good. Nope. 79. He really was, I didn't say he was much of a pioneer, but he was a bit of a pioneer, doing things with animation that I think a lot of people just didn't assume that you could do. He is famous for very fast-paced shots where a lot of things happen. and a very sort of specific running style. Nowadays we call it ninja running. It's a tendency to run with your arms out for balance as you lean forward. Um, and most of his characters, when they're doing action, are running very very quickly in order to get somewhere and do something very quickly. And while it can be sort of hard to follow, it does create this spectacular sense of urgency and action and just the things that you want in a film. And all of this set to some of the most stunning background images I've ever seen drawn, period. Not just for animation, not for manga or comic books, but just jaw-dropping images. The castle of Cagliostro itself, they must have drawn that place from every angle. I bet if you went into Minecraft, you could probably make it. And given that it was made in 1979, this brings me to something else that's going to come up in just a couple of days. Castlevania, which is known as Demon Castle Dracula in Japan. Some of its more famous renditions are very, very, very similar to the Castle of Cagliostro. Different colors to make it darker and more menacing, but the same sorts of towers and bridges and stairways, multiple buildings, ramparts connecting everything together. It's just a feast for the eyes. The music was so touching too. And there were many periods where there's no music whatsoever, but a lot of the music that they did use was timed very much to the animation to give it, that much more oomph. Animated from before I was born. I was born in 1981, which makes me 29 years old. But, yeah. So a couple days ago, or maybe even last week, I mentioned being out on a lake. I specifically mentioned Lake Almanor in Northern California. A little place owned by my great aunt and uncle, Al and Betty. And sadly, Uncle Al just passed away recently. I wasn't sure if he was still alive or not at the time. And he was, but he died a few days ago. And we're doing a memorial in July, very early July, because some of his descendants are singing in Europe right now and won't be able to come back to America for a little while. But we're going to go flying down to Sacramento and then driving, I'm not sure where, maybe Santa Rosa, not San Jose, that doesn't seem right. San Fernando. But thankfully this hasn't shaken me up quite as much as someone like Leo passing. Or if my grandma June had passed away. She's 97 years old, and I know she's not going to live forever, but we're all plugging for her to make it all the way to 100. She'll turn 100 in 2020. I'll be 39. There was something so relaxing, even though the story itself is action-packed with twists and turns and daring rescues and lots of missteps and misadventures. But I commented to my friends in Discord as I was watching it, they don't make movies like that anymore. They don't make people like Uncle Al anymore, who had slot machine, a little tiny toy slot machine in this big A-frame cabin at Lake Almanor that my sister and I put nickels into just so we could take them out again. He had a little roulette wheel that I played with. Didn't understand roulette. Understood that the ball was spun around and then would land in a square. He liked encouraging me to think, but he didn't give me a lot of answers. He was a doctor, so that was how he had the money to have a cabin at Lake Almanor. And he once taught me one remedy for sore throat is to gargle salt water. I had a terrible sore throat earlier this year, and I actually went and gargled salt water, and it helped a little bit. I remember it helping a lot more when I was a kid, and he recommended me doing that when my throat was sore. And I was sort of astounded, and he explained salt actually increases the healing that your body is naturally trying to do whenever it's injured or sick. And in fact, when they gave lashes to sailors at sea and threw salt water in their back, it was not just because the salt water stung and made the lashes, which definitely already hurt, feel even worse. It was to clean the wound and disinfect it. And in fact, even though it hurt like hell at the time, sailors that were washed with salt water after the lashing definitely felt better, although that is a nasty little punishment. It's important to remember that the guys that got these lashings were doing something wrong according to the captain or whatever other disciplinary group existed aboard the ship. Obviously, sometimes the idea of what is bad is subjective. And if the mutiny on the Bounty is any indication, sometimes you can push a crew a little too hard. Uncle Al Swenson, lived to be 91 years old. Married to my Grandma June's sister Betty. Rest in peace, Uncle Al. I'm Eric Spornitz, and tomorrow will be better.